In a couple of weeks, our choir is going down to First Unitarian Church downtown, and they're going to be singing with the choir from First Unitarian. And then next month, I believe, both choirs are going to be here singing together for us. Truly exciting. Speaking of singing, earlier in our service today, we sang a song called Love is at the Center. This hymn is from our newly published online collection of songs by UU composers. And the words include, love is at the center, and at the center there is love. This phrase is not simply a pleasant-sounding, warm and fuzzy affirmation. It is a vital part of the core values that we share here in this all-peoples community. It is both an invitation and a challenge to live into our faith, a faith that is all about love and compassion. Almost 5 years ago, around the time that I moved here to Louisville and began serving as your minister, a conversation was starting within our larger Unitarian Universalist movement. This was a conversation about our identity as religious people and how we express what it is that holds us together amid all of our blessed diversity of thought, belief, background, and culture. For over half a century, when that question came up, what do UUs believe? Many of us would refer to a set of principles adopted by our congregations at the time of the merger of the Universalists and the Unitarians back in 1961. Now, these principles have been adapted and adopted and altered and added to over the years. But in 2021, it was decided that the time was right to consider radically reimagining them. And thus a years-long process of dialogue and discussion began, involving UUs from churches all across our country. In the spring of 2023, a proposal based on feedback and input from thousands of individuals and hundreds of congregations was presented for preliminary approval to the delegates of our Unitarian Universalist General Assembly. After further adapting and change and transformation, a final version was officially approved and adopted in the summer of 2024. Now, while our older principles were statements of abstract ideals that we aspire to try to live by, this new version of our shared identity is set in concrete values that come along with specific attitudes and actions that we are called to embrace. The values of liberation, equity, transformation, pluralism, generosity, and interdependence are held together and informed by the core value of love. Love is at the center, and at the center, there is love. Now, I vividly recall some of the discussions that took place right here at All Peoples in our congregation in the year or so leading up to the vote that would adopt these new statements. Some of you might remember some of those conversations as well. Freely exploring in the wording that was being proposed, freely expressing our thoughts and our ideas and our feelings about them was an important part of the whole process. It was essential to discerning how all this would ultimately come together for us and for our larger UU movement. I remember in particular, more than a few of us here at All Peoples said that we were not so sure about the idea of putting love at the center, of proclaiming to the world that love was what Unitarian Universalism was all about, above all else. For some of us, this church had always been a place that celebrated the use of reason, the act of intellectual exploration, and seeking truth by using facts rather than feelings. And love, well, that's kind of a squishy term, isn't it? It's an emotionally based sentiment that is really hard to define or even to describe sometimes. Love is a word that is used in so many different ways by different people. It is used to both heal and to harm. Love involves a level of uncertainty and risk. Love makes us vulnerable. And so declaring that Unitarian Universalism is all about love above all else, well, that felt a little uncomfortable to more than a few of us. Now, when I heard these concerns, I have to admit that I kind of shared them, at least a little. But I also realized the power of elevating love to a central place within our shared identity and the transformation that that might bring. If who we are striving to become does not involve a little risk and feel a little challenging and maybe even squishy at times, then maybe we're not on the right path. Maybe we're holding on to comfort and certainty over humility and openness. Now, I bring all this up today because throughout the month of October, our congregation is joining with many other Unitarian Universalists all across our country in exploring the theme of cultivating compassion. Our young people will be talking about compassion in their family ministry groups each Sunday morning this month. Our Sunday morning discussion next week is going to be centered on compassion. And in the coming weeks, we will be engaging with all this as a part of our spirituality, seeing how it relates to our sacred connections to the earth, to our relationships with our immigrant neighbors, to our responsibility to be active participants in efforts to protect our democracy and defend our freedoms. Today, the question that I have for you is this: if love is at the center of our faith, how does that call us to cultivate compassion? You know, it can be quite tempting to think about that word, compassion. It's a pleasant sounding, maybe it's even a lightweight endeavor, perhaps something that is even more squishy than love, but in a warm and kind of tender way. It brings to mind all of those moments right after something horrible or hard happens, and people quickly rush to tell each other, "I'm holding you in my thoughts and my prayers." We have been taught that compassion is a matter of being nice, of feeling empathy and sympathy, and being emotionally connected. But real compassion is more than that. British author and activist Andrew Boyd has written this. He says, "Having compassion hurts. When you actually feel connected to everything, you also feel responsible for everything. Your destiny becomes bound up with the destinies of others, because true compassion is to engage with the suffering happening all around us." Now, what I hear in Boyd's words is that there is a difference between empathy and compassion. When I was 6 years old, my family was on the way to church one night. It was Christmas Eve, and a snowstorm had blanketed the streets. As we walked from the parking lot down the street to the church, my mom just happened to notice someone curled up in some bushes along the road, clearly shivering in the well below freezing temperatures. We walked on, but as we arrived at the front door of the church, my dad said, "Now you guys go on inside, save me a seat, I'll be right back." I found out later that evening that my dad had walked back up the street to check on this person we saw huddled in the bushes. When he found out that this man was homeless, he invited him to come down to the church, to come inside for a little warmth during the service. I found out that afterwards another church member offered to drive this stranger to a shelter. This man said thanks, but he declined. But he did use the phone to call a friend to come pick him up. Now, I would bet that if you asked my dad all these years later if he remembered that particular Christmas Eve, he would probably say no. But I think about it quite often because it taught me the difference between empathy and compassion. Empathy would be going on with our night at church as planned, and maybe expressing to each other how sorry we feel for that poor homeless man who was so cold and had nowhere to go on Christmas Eve. Compassion, well, that was what my dad did. Doing something to ease someone's suffering, if only for an hour or two. This week I was reading through some discussion materials provided by our UU Soul Matters team around this topic of cultivating compassion, and I was struck by these statements. Compassion is not just niceness and thoughtful feelings. It's about something deeper, an impulse that drives us to action. That may be compassion's defining characteristic. It is distinguished by doing. To feel the pain of another. Well, empathy has that covered. But compassion takes it a step further. It urges us to do something about that pain. In other words, compassion calls us to change things. It is not just about comforting others. It is about our comfort being disturbed. It is about connecting with another's pain and struggle so deeply that we cannot rest until they can rest. When we feel compassion, real compassion, we do not just understand someone else's pain. We want it to stop. And then we do whatever is needed to make it stop, if and when we can. And so, when it comes to our faith, if love is at the center, and at the center there is love, how does that call us to cultivate compassion within ourselves and in our larger communities? I mean, let's face it, we live today in a society that seems to be growing meaner and less compassionate all the time. We have leaders who have declared that empathy is a weakness and seem to believe that the suffering of others does not matter, that it just might be necessary to maintain the place of privilege of a select few. And more of our neighbors appear to be buying into these perspectives, while folks like us just try our best to remain compassionate amidst our outrage and our disillusionment. In this environment, perhaps the question to ask ourselves is not, how deeply am I able to feel about all this? But rather, the right question is, what am I prepared to do about it? I believe that our Unitarian Universalist values tell us that cultivating compassion comes out of embracing the truth of our connections. The fact that there really is a giant cosmic net or web like the one that Barb and I talked about in our video story earlier in the service. And that every person, that we, along with everybody else on this planet, are all precious jewels, connected by the strands of this web, reflecting the beauty and the holy light of each other. Cultivating our own sense of compassion, first and foremost, has to come out of living out of our interdependence, knowing that connection is the very nature of all reality. Feeling deeply about what is happening to those around us and among us who are being hated on and attacked, who are being rounded up right now. Feeling all that is not easy. It hurts. It sucks. It is difficult to hold and sustain for very long without wiping us out. But when we can allow those emotions, those feelings of empathy, that love for the preciousness of life to move through us, to make its way from our heads and our hearts out into our hands and our bodies. When we can do that, we become much more empowered to act in a spirit of true compassion. So perhaps compassion is not such a squishy thing after all. Perhaps compassion is found in concrete actions. Maybe it's sending an email to our mayor, telling him that allowing city facilities to be used by ICE in their indiscriminate roundups of immigrants is the wrong thing to do, and it needs to stop. Perhaps compassion is donating food and personal care items to Eastern Area Community Ministries food pantry. Or better yet, calling them up to offer a little of your time to volunteer there when they need you. Perhaps compassion is just taking a moment to stop and to ask your neighbor, "How are you doing?" Because you know that he is caring for his mom who has Alzheimer's disease. Now, I don't need to stand up here and tell you all this. We are a congregation of people who are actively involved in this world. We are the people volunteering and reaching out and supporting others all the time. We are engaged and caring people who feel deeply about the struggles of others. But I also think that we don't always align our individual acts of service to that deeper place, that place of connection and relationship that comes out of our love and compassion. My experience has been that the more that I'm able to do that, the more that I can name and directly attach my feelings of heartache and concern for others directly to the work that I'm doing, the work that helps and heals this world just a little. The more I can do that, the easier doing all this stuff becomes. The more that I feel like I get out of it, the better I am at doing it, the more I'm able to maintain my hope that any of it makes a difference. Of course, it helps to have all of you, to have this beloved community, to have the values of Unitarian Universalism to encourage me and inspire me as well. So in closing, I guess my message for you today is this. Cultivating our compassion involves more than having squishy feelings. It is letting that suffering, the suffering we're feeling, the suffering around us, letting it seep deep into our hearts and our spirits, and allowing that hurt to push us, to move us, to inspire us to reach out and to keep being a force for good. And amidst everything that's happening, to always remember that love is at the center, and at the center there is love. Amen, and so may it be.